Coming up, glaring data shows Native women are not being paid equitably. What exactly does this look like? We find out. Plus, an artist takes traditional symbolism to the next level. And we learn about the new film In Our Own Hands. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'watsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start in California, where the National Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention kicked off. The annual event started with a welcome by Chairman Ernie Stevens. It was hosted at the House of Blues. This is one of the largest gatherings for tribal leaders and casino executives in the country. Members of the National Indian Gaming Association decide the year's priorities, and the trade show serves as a playground for seeing the latest products like casino machines and even hotel accessories. This year's event is in its 35th year of running. Well, water problems in Honolulu, Hawaii have continued 5 months after a military mishap. In November, 19,000 gallons of mixed fuel and water were spilled at the Navy's Red Hill facility. Contaminants from the mix leaked into the water supply, affecting 93,000 people. Critics say the 20 tanks at the massive storage facility that are only 100 feet away from a water aquifer were not properly maintained. Ku'ipo Kumukahi is a Native Hawaiian musician. She says the military should have prepared long ago to shut down the World War II era tanks.
Look at Red Hill and what happened with the water situation at Red Hill. You know, my father was one of those young boys that was hired to bury those tanks, and he spoke about it in Hawaiian, and he knew it wasn't right. He knew that one day, he would say it in Hawaiian, that one day those tanks will deteriorate. They had to shut it down, but you know, my father's been passed away for over 20 years.
Officials are now asking the people of Honolulu to cut their water use by 10% while they work to drain contaminated water from its system. Now to Oklahoma, where Cherokee leaders visited the state's capital for Cherokee Nation Legislative Day last week. Part of the day's event included an address from Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. Here's part of his speech that included the contributions the nation makes not only for tribal citizens, but for the state of Oklahoma.
It is truly my honor to be with you and to bring to the Capitol representatives of the great Cherokee Nation. Some of the things we're doing back in Cherokee Nation are things that I think can be a model for this state and for this country. For example, we just announced $120 million for the cause of housing. $60 million of that will go for affordable housing. Within the span of 3 years, there will be more homes in Northeast Oklahoma than there are today because of the efforts of the Cherokee Nation.
Many industries are showing signs of rebounding in the pandemic, including tribal tourism. The American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association is helping tribes expand its reach. Go International is the name of the 2-day event held in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Attendees include employees from tribal tourism departments to privately run tourism businesses and even some government agencies. Sherry Rupert is the CEO of the organization and also sits on the board of the U.S. Travel Association. Rupert says her group did not get any of the $750 million from the American Rescue Plan that was set aside to rebuild tourism.
So because tribes don't give into that, oftentimes they are left out of tourism marketing within their states and their regions. And so it's very important then for IANTA the only organization across the country to advance Indian country tourism, to be able to have funds like that, to market tourism, considering the devastating impacts that COVID had on our industry.
The organization's survey found that tribal hospitality is a $14 billion industry. In April, Canadian soccer club Pacific FC debuted an Indigenous-themed uniform. The uniforms were designed by artist Maynard Johnny Jr. He says his design is inspired by the resiliency of the salmon. These black and white jerseys showcase a child's face, which represents hope for a brighter future. The designer says the team wanted to highlight Canada's complicated history with Indigenous people.
Pacific FC had this idea of truth and reconciliation. They wanted to figure out how they can use truth and reconciliation as a vehicle to make, raise awareness that they want to, right some wrongs and make changes in Canada's current, state with Indigenous people. So it was sort of a collaboration of the two of them, and it kind of just fruition from creating the design to represent resilience for Indigenous people, creating the awareness.
Johnny says he is pleased with the reception the uniform has received and is happy to see it become one of the team's alternate jerseys. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, Native women make significant contributions at work, but their pay doesn't always reflect that. We learn more. Stay with us. Workforce data shows Native women make significantly less money than a white male. This data shows that Native women lose out on $25,000 a year, and over the course of a Native woman's lifetime, this equals a $1 million wage loss in comparison to white males. Joshua Arce is the Chief Executive Officer of the Partnership for Native Americans. He is a national thought leader who is passionate about fixing this data. Hi, Joshua. Welcome to the ICT Newscast.
Good morning, Aaliyah. Thanks for having me.
Start by explaining how this pay gap affects the lives of Native women every single day.
Well, I think to begin with, it starts in the homes, and it's going to start in the homes for what they experience on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the food that they can provide and put on the table, whether it's the educational opportunities that they're able to take advantage and leverage or offer their children, or it's the extracurricular activities that are included in schools that are often cost prohibitive from participating for some of the students. So it can affect it on a daily basis. And especially if you start looking at the ability to establish any sort of wealth.
And when we're talking about this pay gap, I mean, you just explained the ways that it affects everyone on a daily basis. But when we're talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic, how do you think that that has affected this data?
I think that it has existed prior to COVID-19. But with COVID-19, a lot of the issues in the Indian country had a very bright light put on the disparities that have existed. And so what we are seeing now are greater initiatives and more focus and more intentionality with solutions to make sure that we're able to close some of the gaps exposed by COVID, which include this pay gap.
When we're talking about being intentional, I'm really curious, how do we fix this issue? You yourself are in a very powerful position there as the CEO of the Partnership with Native Americans. What do you think that men can do to uplift women and make sure that they're being advocates themselves?
I think the first part is raising awareness, identifying it as an issue and being intentional with actions once we find those issues. Making sure that in our own organizations, we are being fair and comparable. We're looking at it through an equity lens. And I think that to share with other organizations, especially tribal organizations, governments, tribal governments, and the like, because many times our systems are modeled off of mainstream systems, and we can really put our thumbprint on those systems in which we increase the value of female contributions to the workforce. And we really can shift the way we think about our workforce in tribal environments. So that way we can close that equity gap.
What are some of the ways that your organization is already doing that?
Well, if we were to review our organization, we have many of our leadership positions. In fact, right now, 6 out of 7 of our board of directors are women, Native women. And we also have key women in positions of leadership management, and we want to continue to grow them to be supervisors or managers and ensure that those wages are consistent or even above some of their male counterparts.
Your organization, of course, is Native-centered, but so many other across mainstream society are not Native-centered. And I'm hearing so often that the pay gap is one that's systemic. So I'm really curious if you can tell us what that actually means and how did we get here?
Well, I think if we roll back the tape to the beginning, this country wasn't necessarily built for women to have property rights, to have voting rights, let alone women of color. And so it really is rooted deep in the history of this country. But there are organizations like ours, but also within the major Fortune 500 companies that are doing some work. So for instance, within AT&T, there's an intercouncil organization for AT&T employees that represents natives. There's a similar one in American Airlines, and other organizations have identified the value of diversity, inclusion, and equity within their own ranks and are pushing more towards these initiatives.
Well, Joshua, thank you so much for being here and for addressing this issue.
Thank you.
Guggenheim Fellowships were awarded to 180 scientists, writers, scholars, and artists honored across 51 fields of study. Chanupa Luger is one of them. He is an enrolled citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes of Fort Berthold, making his home in New Mexico after he studied at the Institute of American Indian Arts. His work is as bold as its landscape. Welcome, Chanupa, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Start us off by describing what got you started in making art.
My mother, Kathy Whitman Elkwoman, is an artist. And so I kind of grew up in and around the Native American art market. And she raised 5 kids as a single parent on art. And so I knew it was possible. And I think that was the big kind of leap into having the confidence to engage in like a strange economy.
Tell us what makes you decide, what season do you want to work on something different? How do you sort of decide what to work on?
I tend to start with material. I like to repurpose kind of used material or abandoned material. Basically the detritus of America, things that have been kind of left behind. And most of the material that I work with has already kind of served one purpose. And so it's a challenge for me to transform that into another idea or another piece. And I like the idea of being flexible with what material it is. I have a background in ceramics, which is an incredible material to work with. And yet simultaneously, I'm interested in figuring out how to create less waste in my general practice. And so finding materials that are remnants from other industrial processes is kind of like what I like to work with. from there, I'm looking at what I have and then creating an idea out of that material.
When we're talking about creating less waste, why is that important to you to be able to do that kind of work?
I think it's important for me, mostly just in my studio. Like, I like the idea of sharing work that is bold and bright, but also made out of things that were abandoned, things that were left behind, things that were used only once, maybe, and I think that there is I don't know, like an inherent kind of traditionalness to that, especially because the things that I work on and make are maybe outside of the, quote unquote traditional work. I think the ethos in which I build work is completely embedded in that narrative. So that's kind of why it remains important to me.
Well, I want to make sure that our viewers are able to see your work in action. Let's take a look at this video that's part of the Future Ancestral Technologies.
We must practice maintenance rather than preservation. Extinction of culture. Where did colonialism come from? How do I develop sympathy for the colonizer? How to heal a wound that is still being cut? By traveling into the future. We survive you. All my relations.
Chanupa, I'm really curious. Can you tell us about the video that we just watched and how it came to be?
Yeah, this piece is it's embedded in this kind of storyline of future ancestral technologies, which is it's science fiction. That's the best way that I could describe it. I'm a science fiction fan, and there's so little representation of Indigenous people in pop culture in the future. So a part of my kind of project is to look at ancestral knowledge and share that for future generations. So a lot of the materials that I'm using in the piece are, once again, leftover pieces. I like to work with Afghans that I believe have an inherent kind of like empathy and care in the production of them, and they're primarily a part of a gift economy, which is so contrary to our current consumer market. And that gift I'd like to kind of play forward and imagine us telling our old stories, our ancestral stories, to future generations. And so the piece that we just witnessed is a look at kind of our relationship with technology, and moreover, to emphasize that technology isn't the mechanisms that we use, but the ideas that are created. So there's tons of Indigenous technology that hasn't been kind of moved through material science.
Before this interview is over, I, of course, have to ask you and congratulate you for your Guggenheim Fellowship. Tell us if you have any projects planned and, how you're celebrating.
Those pieces that you saw were based on some of our Buffalo dancers from up where I'm from in North Dakota, kind of Mandan style, but moved through new materials. And you could actually see around me, I have 5 more that I'm building, so that I have 7 of them completed for a project that I'm working on in Amarillo, Texas. That's based on buffalo. The whole project is based on buffalo, and kind of witnessing their annihilation through a war of attrition for Plains tribes, North and Southern. So doing this project in Amarillo seems relevant. I want to run these pieces through the landscape of Northern Texas. And that piece is kind of accompanied by a bunch of other Buffalo-based projects. One of them is a bead project. So this is a socially engineered project, and I'm about to launch that completely and would love the participation of communities across North America that have relationships with buffalo.
Well, we'll be really excited to learn more about that in the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Jennifer Varenchek is a writer and director who started her career as an actress. She moved behind the camera so she could contribute to creating more accurate depictions of Indigenous people on screen. Her latest work is called In Our Own Hands. It won the Gold Award at the Minefield Film Festival in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the film has also been nominated for several other awards. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Auntie's fry breads, remember? Big is your face. You know, we don't have to do this tonight.
We're running out of time.
I have 2 of these.
Okay, ladies, let's pick something.
You guys, Molly's up. Molly's up. I couldn't sleep.
We think we know where Jenny is.
What? Call tribal police.
We're gonna go check it out ourselves. We're taking care of this now.
Don't worry, we got this. The police handle it. The cops aren't here to help us, Malls. If anybody can do it, it's us. They picked the wrong family this time.
Jennifer, tell us about what the film's about and maybe the main characters.
Sure. Yes. Well, basically, art is healing. And the night that I got a call that a friend of mine was missing, all of that anger and frustration from MMIW just kind of like came up inside of me. And I dealt with my feelings and emotions through writing. So that's what this is about. It's about a group of women who, when one of their family members goes missing, they decide to take things into their own hands and investigate and, check things out because they are out to make a rescue attempt.
What strikes me about the storyline is that it is real in so many families. I mean, so many women and cousins and aunties really rally when a relative goes missing. So that really strikes me to see that this is something that could happen in real life.
Definitely. I mean, it is a film and it's entertainment. So the feature film is a drama, but with elements of action. But at the same time, it is based on, things that are currently happening, like the MMIW, MMIP crisis that we have right now.
I'm really curious if we're pulling the curtain back. Tell us how long production took, where it was shot, and, any other details like that.
I would love to tell you about that. It happened, I finished the script in 2020, and then in 2021 I entered a pitch contest through Hawaii Filmmakers Collective, and I won the contest. And so February 1st I began production with the funding that I received, as well as funding that I crowdsourced and funding from myself. And then we basically shot everything in April and edited, and it was ready to go, and it premiered virtually through HFC in June. So it was a sprint. It was definitely like invigorating and had ups and downs, and I absolutely love the process, and I'm excited to get started for the feature film.
As we saw in that trailer, you yourself are in this film. Was that the first time that you acted in your own film that you also wrote and directed?
That wasn't the first time. I've been in another film that I made. I made a horror short called Crossers. But I wasn't planning to be in Our Own Hands. It's just that I'm very conscious of making sure that I have Indigenous actresses, and we're on Oahu. So although we have Oahu Natives Nations Organization, ONO, it's a limited amount of Indigenous Native American women here that could play the roles. So the roles are actually my friends that actresses. One professional actress, and the rest are my friends who I had to like beg, please be in my movie, and they agreed. So it worked out.
Oh, that is so fun. And I'm sure they had a lot of fun. As I mentioned in my opening, this film also has won an award. What did that feel like for you to see your film win this big award?
I think that I truly know the meaning of when people say, I'm just honored to be nominated. Like, I really know what that feels like. And it's just, I'm just so grateful. I mean, I don't have words. That's how grateful I am. I'm just very grateful, and I'm very hopeful for the future. And I just have a lot of gratitude.
Well, Jennifer, before we leave you, tell our viewers where they can watch this film.
Yes. So right now we are going to be screening at the Made in Hawaii Film Festival, which is May 6th through 8th in Hilo. And then the second one is the Dream Speakers Film Festival, and that is in Canada. And the date is May 27th through 29th. You can also follow In Our Own Hands on Instagram, where I'll be posting all the latest news.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.